Hello and welcome to Fighting Through Writing, your journey into the weird and wonderful world of competitive sports fiction. My name is Paul, I'm a competitive sports fiction writer and the mind behind El Pablo, the current reigning, for now, undisputed and tag team champion of the Extreme Wrestling Corporation. It is hot. We are fresh off the back of a heat wave here in the UK. The kind of weather where you see all of these UK-based Americans coming on social media and saying, "We're sorry, we didn't know about the humidity." And my studio where we're filming this is right next to the boiler. Like, the boiler is right there. So I've had no desire to sit in this room for an hour or however long and do filming. Like, it's slightly better today. It's been raining, but even so, it is toasty. Anyway, in this episode, we are going to be talking about side characters. You know them, your protagonists presumably come to love or hate or feel some kind of way about them in between, and I have never really given them too much deliberate thought. Like, I've used them, obviously. Pablo has a lot of them, but they've always been kind of just named vessels, I guess, for him to react to and to bounce his own personality off of. Like, I've never really given them too much in the way of their own kind of agency and their own sort of motivations. Like, there have been a few exceptions to that, obviously. So his uncle Villano Velando, his motivation is to stop Pablo from taking on the Velando family name and thereby overshadowing his own legacy and the legacy of his sons, just like he feels that Pablo's father Chico did to him when they were younger. Likewise, Chico, he wants to make amends to Pablo for the hurt and the destruction that he caused in the past by having an affair that ultimately led to the revelation that Pablo's kind of nemesis, Xavier Reed, is his half-brother. But with Pablo's tag team, the Silent Discotechnicos, being booked in a match against the Next Level on Friday Night Rampage, I figured that this presented us with a good opportunity to dig a little deeper into arguably his most important side character, his brother Vertigo. Now, the Vertigo character is one that I first came up with, I guess, kind of a pilot version of, I want to say like 15 years ago, something like that. I came up with this character called Silencio, who was essentially a masked luchador similar to Pablo, but he didn't speak. He was very much kind of like a silent assassin, I suppose. So he had a manager who every week, depending on who his opponent was, would kind of meet him and give him his assignment, give him a dossier with all the information about his opponent and how he could beat him and all that sort of stuff. So it didn't really go anywhere because, as we will discover later in this video, writing from the point of view of a character who doesn't speak is challenging and certainly a really dramatic departure from a guy who is as larger than life and as attention hungry as is Pablo. But then there was a time that I think I've spoken about before on here where I was feeling very burnt out with writing and I kind of ghosted from the group that I was writing with, and I kind of took, I don't know how long, it was a good 6 months maybe. I don't know how time works, but when I finally shook off the burnout and wanted to get back into it, I did the questionable thing of assuming a different persona and kind of sneaking my way back in, and the character I used for that was Vertigo. So it was the same kind of thing. So a luchador who didn't speak, and now, as the name would suggest, this was a wrestler who I never really nailed down or kind of went into exactly what the cause of this was, but he was essentially scared of heights due to a bad fall or a bad kind of a wrestling move gone wrong or something like that. And because, a wrestling ring is naturally an elevated surface, he was just hyper fixated on his opponent and on the moment and on the match at hand. Because imagine like a racing horse with like blinkers on. It was kind of, if I just look at this person ahead of me, I don't have to focus on the fact that I'm slightly high up, that kind of thing. And the original plan was always that once I'd kind of won everyone in that group over, I would then reveal myself and reveal Vertigo to actually be El Pablo. But then I think the company was holding a battle royal kind of thing, or, an event where it was a match where we needed a lot of wrestlers involved. And to make up the numbers, I had Vertigo and Pablo in there together. I think I still had it in my mind that because of pro wrestling and luchador trickery and suspension of disbelief and all that stuff, it could still be revealed that they were the same person. But this was then around the time that the whole Xavier Reed, El Pablo, Chico Volando thing kind of started being talked about between me and Mike, Xavier Reed's handler. So that then led to Vertigo being introduced as Chico's other son, kind of as a decoy and a kind of a delaying of the whole El Pablo Xavier Reed confrontation. And then that's kind of led us to the present day here, really. I've always loved the idea of the Vertigo character. I just think the idea and the concept of, a luchador, this traditionally kind of high flying, balls to the wall, kind of bright, colourful, larger than life style of wrestling, having a luchador who is afraid of heights and is therefore very stoic and very still and kind of doesn't really do an awful lot. I find that contradiction really kind of fascinating. But as I say, with this tag match, I wanted to push myself and to try and kind of give Vertigo that bit of shine and that bit of, as I say, that bit of agency, and just kind of really try and give a bit of personality to him and to what he wants and how he kind of is interpreting the things that are going on around him. So I, as always, will leave a link in the description to this promo on my WordPress site, the Fighting Through Writing WordPress site. That's where I'm currently uploading all of the works that I've written for this El Pablo character and this El Pablo story. We're currently just into 2021, so still a fair bit to go. But if you've been following along since I started that site, this is about the time where it starts getting good. The 2018 to 2020 there was a lot of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what would stick, but this is where we start to hit our stride, I personally think. But so this chapter in our story is simply titled Vertigo, and we start with Pablo and Vertigo and their cousin Verana on a plane from Tokyo to Chicago. They'd just been in Tokyo, where Pablo just had a trios match with Narumi Satsumi and Head Huntress Aya, his two stablemates in the Shinijoshi, which, by the way, I didn't really discuss on here, purely because the story we wrote for that was a collaborative thing between the three of us, and I don't really want to put other people's work out there as well, without their kind of say so and their blessing. So, but yes, we start on the plane from Tokyo to Chicago, and Pablo is still obsessing over this social media post that they saw from their uncle Viano after Pablo lost the international championship to Berto a few weeks ago, where he basically, it was just one word: disappointing. So Pablo is crashing out about that. Obviously, if you've been following this story, you'll know that Pablo's whole driving motivation is that him becoming the undisputed champion is, in his mind, going to eventually convince Viano that he is worthy of earning the Volando name, and by extension Vertigo as well. So him having done that and still getting those knockbacks, he's finding it tough to deal with. So yeah, he's stressing out about that, and then he ultimately, aided by a well-timed fistful of Skittles, gets the idea that they need to stage some kind of happening in Chicago when they get there, specifically at a restaurant called Rabanitos, which is a Mexican sort of street food bar restaurant. And it's in the conversations they're having about this that we kind of get that first little detailing of the differences between Pablo and his brother and the types of people that they are. So yeah, for all his accolades and accomplishments, all his corporate sponsorships and silver screen flirtations, attention was the currency by which El Pablo most defined his worth, the thing he spent almost every waking moment chasing, and the thing in which he truly believed, in his disco-technicoloured heart of hearts, lay the key to his and Vertigo's triumphant reintegration into the legacy of La Familia Valando. Each city the Discotechnicos travelled to, Pablo had always sought to stage some kind of stunt, shindig or shenanigan. The unfurling of a giant Shinajoshi flag outside the Betsy Ross house in Philadelphia, for example, or the storming of the shores of Galveston Bay upon a mysteriously commandeered Portuguese caravel. Now, with Viano's condemnation ringing in his eyes, and with an undisputed championship clash against the one and only Ace King at the Rumble now officially on the horizon, it was no surprise that Pablo would be seeking to redouble his efforts. And so it is that, a few days later, scores of excited members of the EWC universe descend upon Chicago's trendy Pilsen neighborhood to partake in La Fiesta de la Rabanitolution, a festival of music, margaritas and merriment put on to mark the hopefully triumphant return of the Silent Discotechnicos to tag team action against Next Level at Rampage 542. As the restaurant's vibrant mural-painted walls pulsate with the dizzying beats and basslines of Spanish hyperpop, however, one man stands alone outside them. Vertigo may have shared the same traumatic pro wrestling education as Pablo, but their responses and the way they each had come to deal with its effects could scarcely have been more different. Where Pablo had thrown himself with ever greater abandon towards whatever spotlight he could find, Vertigo had shrouded himself in shadow. Where Pablo had become larger and louder than life, Vertigo had fallen silent, for too long paralysed by the fear of punishment and retribution for daring to stick his masked head above the parapet. Where Pablo had been adored, Vertigo had been unassuming. Yeah, that then is kind of the laying out of the differences between Pablo and Vertigo. So Pablo, very much the attention seeker, almost kind of acting out because he was always denied that attention kind of by his family. So he's now going to try and get it by whatever means he can, because that's ultimately how he has come to define his own value and his own self-worth. Whereas Vertigo is almost like a scared puppy, really. He's almost been scared into silence and into submission and kind of paralysis almost, but with kind of the guidance of the Southern Express and Pablo and other people like that, he's almost become this savant like character, I suppose, where he can kind of just be still and not really doing anything, very unassuming, but then when it becomes time to fight, that's where he snaps into action and he kind of can catch anyone off guard. I've always kind of pushed the idea within the Discotechnicos as a team that while Pablo is the showman and has obviously been very successful in his own right, Vertigo is the more superior wrestler from a technical standpoint, at least. And so yeah, case in point, perfectly encapsulated within this scene. So Pablo is inside the bar kind of staging this big event that he obviously feels is going to get them media coverage and obviously get people talking about them, whereas Vertigo very much on the outskirts, just kind of on his own in the dark with his thoughts. And that's where we bring Verana into this. Now Verana, I've always had from the beginning of the Vertigo character as being very close to him. Kind of, she's very empathetic to his struggle. She's very protective of him. They're almost kind of big sistered him in a way. So, you know, her driving motivation has always been to help Vertigo succeed and fulfill his potential. So yeah, we cut away from Southern Express based shenanigans to Verana basically saying that this whole setup is playing into the hands of the Next Level, with Vertigo being outside, Pablo being inside. She says, "It's bad enough that it's been more than 6 weeks since the two of you teamed together. Worse still, that Pablo just spent a night fraternising with the number one contenders to your championships, and now you won't even go to his party? So not sure what kind of stead that's going to stand you in ahead of facing off with the best team the EWC could ever hope to see. So yeah, Next Level haven't had too many matches over the past few seasons, but whenever they have been booked, they've always tended to talk about how they're the saviors of tag team wrestling, and they've been very disparaging in the past of two singles wrestlers teaming up to form a tag team, and they're saying, you guys aren't a real tag team, including Pablo and Ace King, who won the tag titles a few years ago as Russian Roulette. So yeah, again, just kind of leaning into that idea that people might have, that because Pablo and Vertigo are so different, and because Pablo can at times be seen to kind of be leaving Vertigo in the shadows, that will ultimately somehow kind of affect their chemistry as a team, especially with Pablo being the undisputed champion as well, and therefore naturally having a significant amount of investment and interest in that side of things as well. And a lot of the way that I ended up writing this was kind of, you'd have Varana sort of chiming in with little points just to sort of move the conversation along, but then it would take on Vertigo's internal monologue, or I guess a third person narrator, but telling you Vertigo's point of view. I'm sure there's a proper writing term, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. Third person limited or something like that. Someone on AuthorTube will tell me the answer. And do please leave a comment. Leave all of the comments, subscribe, like, and all that stuff as well. So yeah, we go over the fact that this is something that a lot of people have said about Pablo and Vertigo. It's also something that Next Level have said about a lot of people. And we then kind of transition into the match itself, talking about how, yes, Next Level might think that they are tag team specialists, but this match that they're booked in is a tornado tag match, which, so a normal tag match is it's one wrestler against another and their partners stand on the apron and you tag each other in, as the name suggests. But a tornado tag match is all four men in the ring at the same time. So there's no tags, there's no kind of traditional tag team strategies of, isolating your opponents or making quick tags in and out to keep yourself fresh. So that almost kind of cancels out the Next Level's strategy and bragging about being the best tag team. And we also talk about how this is basically only their third match in nearly 2 years. So they are almost certainly going to be kind of rusty. They say in their own character profile that they're quite slow out of the gate as well. So that plus ring rust and kind of, not necessarily being fighting fit will presumably lead to them struggling against, the intensity and the speed of Pablo's offense. On the flip side, if they try and kind of catch them off guard and try and get the jump and, really try and cement themselves as contenders for the Disco Technicos titles, that then in theory will open them up to Vertigo's counter wrestling. We then talk about how, like I said before, as a tornado tag match, it's going to be a lot more chaotic than a traditional tag match, and chaos is something that, the Volando family thrives upon. It's their big kind of philosophy and their big teaching as a family. So, this is a fight very much in the Disco Technicos element. We then kind of talk briefly about some of the more chaotic stipulations that Pablo and Vertigo have fought in, including the fact that their very first match in the EWC was a ladder match, a stipulation that should have seen Vertigo crumble, but one that in reality serves as the perfect representation of exactly why all attempts to divide the silent Disco Technicos are doomed to fail. And that's where we then finish with a bit of an insight into Vertigo's motivations. And if you've been following along with the story, you will probably know what those motivations are. If you don't, I won't spoil it. You can go and read it in the link. But yes, suffice it to say that Vertigo at present is kind of committed to doing whatever it takes to help his brother succeed in his ambitions. And yeah, that is Vertigo. Now, this was, as I said already, a very big departure from how I normally write, and normally going from obviously Pablo's point of view, where there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of kind of back and forth. And I don't know whether this helped or hindered me, but I basically, for one reason or another, ended up writing this pretty much in an evening. I think all in all it was about 9 hours solid worth of writing, I think. And a lot of it kind of came together in the moment. I sort of, like I say, I had the idea of writing it from Vertigo's point of view, and I had the idea of starting on the plane and then transitioning to this kind of restaurant. But the actual content, didn't have a clue, honestly. So it was very much a case of put your fingers on the keyboard and trusting your brain to do the rest. And I only really kind of went back and read it just before starting this filming, and I think it's pretty good. I like it. And I think, considering the departure that it is, and, you know, considering I pulled it out of you know where, I think it's pretty good. I quite like it. I think it, in my mind at least, it's quite a good encapsulation of what I wanted it to be. And I liked giving Vertigo a bit more of that spotlight, and yeah, just a bit more depth and a bit more personality. The scorers did not like it quite so much. I may be being a little dramatic with that, but the Discotechnicos did lose that match. Next Level get the big win over the tag team champions, not for the belts, but yeah, we did not win. So what I thought I could do, just as a companion piece to having gone through that, is go through the scorecards and the feedback that we got for that promo. Now, I have touched upon the scorecards in at least one previous video, I think. But yeah, every match, every piece of work that you submit is scored by, I think it tends to be 3 people. Highest score wins, and the scorecard itself is broken down into a few different sections. So relevancy, which is basically, did you talk about the match? Did you mention your opponent? Did you say where the match is, what kind of match it is, all that kind of stuff. You've then got argument, which is, did you say how your character is going to win, like what their strategy is? Did you sell it as a big deal? Did you show research about your opponent, kind of their strengths and weaknesses, and how that plays off of your character's strengths and weaknesses, that kind of thing, and how that feeds the strategy? You've then got character, which is basically cementing this match within the context of your character's story arc and the world that they are currently inhabiting. You know, what does this match mean to them? What would winning it mean? What would losing it mean? Did you show that kind of through emotions and world building and that kind of thing? And then you've got flow. So was it easy to read? Were all your transitions between thoughts and scenes kind of, were they smooth? Did they make sense? Did you waffle on, and were you writing just for the sake of it, or was it nice and concise? And then there's a few points at the end that are kind of your intangibles. So, like, you know, were you entertained? Did it get a reaction out of you, like laughing, crying, something like that? So yeah, let's go through the cards and see what our feedback was. So scorer number 1, relevancy feedback. No notes here. Great job on relevancy and the balance between argument and character work. Argument feedback. You did a great job handling the arguments on how and why the Discotechnicos would win this match, and I liked the unique approach you took. Character feedback. The character work was quite well done here, especially with subverting some expectations by putting more focus on Vertigo. Made for an interesting read in terms of both in-ring and personal development. Flow feedback, no further notes, great job on flow. And then creativity feedback. So for the most part, I quite enjoyed this piece. My only really minor critique is that the approach of focusing on Vertigo left something missing from the proceedings, and I think it comes from the realization that focusing on the silent partner of the duo came with its own set of challenges. I mentioned how much I enjoyed subverting expectations with this focus, but I do think that subverting things even further by exploring that character even more would have ramped things up for me here. So total score, 27 out of 28. Overall feedback, this was a strong piece overall. Really likes your approach to tackling argument and character work, though I think exploring the dynamic that comes from focusing on Vertigo would have pushed things even further. So yeah, I think all fair enough. And I think if I'd come up with the idea slightly sooner, then I maybe could have planned it out a bit better rather than just kind of literally going with the flow. And yeah, I could have picked, a few moments in between all of that to kind of pause and dive a little deeper rather than just kind of meandering through and tapping onto little bits throughout, if you see what I mean. Scorer number 2. So the only bit of feedback we got was for creativity, because everything else looks like I think we got full marks for. So creativity feedback, the location, reaction and entertainment all fell flat for me. While it was still a great promo, the location just felt a little off, like out of place. Vertigo is definitely not the funny one of the two. Nothing really grabbed my attention for a reaction, and the promo seemed more informative than entertaining. Put that final act anxiety away, young man, and show us what El Pablo is truly about. Total score 25 out of 28. So, I know whoever you are that you're watching this video, and I just have to say, what did Vertigo do to hurt you so much? But yeah, I mean, it's not wrong. He's not the funny one. And yeah, I guess by its definition, it was a bit info dumpy. There was, a lot more focus on, there was a lot of telling, not showing, because Vertigo doesn't really do anything. So I don't know. That's the challenge of writing this character that I've created. And if I'm going to touch on him again going forwards, then I do, obviously I appreciate that I'm going to have to get better at that part of it. As for number 3, again, full marks on all of it apart from creativity. Docked for location because standing on a sidewalk isn't the most interesting thing. As for entertainment value, I felt there was a bit too much telling and not showing in this one. There was just something very clunky about the descriptions here. Total score 26 out of 28. Overall feedback, I see you tried something different here with a mainly Vertigo focused piece, and I applaud you doing something different, but there were definite areas where this could have been improved, like the location or more for the characters to actually do in this piece. So again, very much the same, kind of a lot of telling and not showing, which, as I said before, I completely get and agree with. But yeah, I think that was definitely a piece where, because I knew that it was going to be a struggle to get the action and any kind of external stuff into it outside of Verana, who was my kind of vessel for that, I did focus very much on the arguments and the character and the internal sort of stuff there. So clearly from that point of view, did its job, got full marks across everything. So it's just that it's the sauce and it's the creativity and it's the actually making that entertaining, I suppose. But yeah, genuinely thank you to all of the scorers for doing what you do and for giving the feedback, even the one who said that Vertigo's not funny. But yeah, I will definitely be considering those notes going forward the next time that I get brave enough to write a piece with Vertigo at the centre. In the meantime, though, it is back to our regularly scheduled programming as El Pablo takes centre stage once again, facing Amish Shelton at Paramount 63 live from Bossier City, Louisiana, in a Made in America flag match ladder match thing. This one I had a lot of fun writing. It obviously felt a lot more natural. It was a lot more of the wordplay and the humour that I really enjoy writing. Now, for this one, even though the fight is in Louisiana, I actually set it in Chicago, partly because that is obviously where Pablo and Vertigo just had their fight against Next Level, but also because Chicago is the current base of the Wrigley Company, who make Skittles. And Skittles are obviously Pablo's life force. I also clocked when doing research for this that there's been a couple of promos this season where the writer behind the Amish Shelton character has set them in kind of a factory setting, and Armis's whole character arc at the minute seems to be he's the grizzled veteran, I suppose, rallying against all the bright young shiny things that he feels are coming in to replace him. And I can't even really do the story that he's telling justice, because it's so good. Like, the imagery and the characterization that he's putting into everything is phenomenal. But I did like the idea of taking that factory setting and playing on this vision of El Pablo as this kind of corporate shill. So yeah, as with the previous promo, I will leave a link in the description to it on our WordPress site. But essentially, after a brief interlude where Pablo and Verana discuss the optics of putting a Mexican wrestler in a Made in America match in this day and age, we transition to the Wrigley building, where Pablo is imparting his wisdom upon a not entirely willing corporate suit-dressed participant called Steven. And we pretty much dive straight into talking about Amish Shelton and his visits to these various factories. And Pablo says, since he's in Chicago, he figured it'd be fitting to meet the man who swore to Berto a month or so ago that he'd win or burn the company to the ground trying, with a little free market funded muscle flexing of his own. And we then find out that rather than being in an actual factory, he's kind of just crammed a load of conveyor belts into the middle of this office building. And Pablo says, we can all see the angle that Amish Shelton's working here, right? A lone hero stranded amongst a never-ending parade of pristine plastic pre-packaged products of the capitalistic process, all condemned to wither and decay until only the memories of the real effing deal remain. And hey, who's been waving the flag of Adam Smith's America these last couple of decades more proudly and loudlier than me? And we then kind of draw on the dichotomy and the difference between Pablo and Armis. Pablo's the light to Shelton's shade, the yin to his yang, all those good cliches. But Pablo says, even though it might look as though we're operating on very different wavelengths, we're both actually pretty much fighting for the same thing. We're fighting for legacy and identity. Like, Pablo's fighting to prove himself worthy of the Valando family name, whereas Armis is fighting because, what was it again? If I don't keep moving, I disappear. Like, that's Armis's whole motivation and his whole mindset at the minute, is that he needs to keep fighting, because without it, he doesn't know who he is. Again, much like Pablo with attention. But then Pablo goes on to say that, while Pablo has spent the last 4 years leading a Rainbowlution, Armis has become a man increasingly obsessed with remaining relevant, though not, it seems, for his own accomplishments, but rather for spoiling other people's opportunities at getting their own. So the idea that while Pablo's kind of bringing everyone into it and bringing, the crowd along with him, and his brother and his cousin and all the other members of the Rainbowlution, Armis is becoming increasingly isolated by his own actions. And then Pablo says, but here's the thing, is memories don't exist in a vacuum. Names don't mean skittles if there's nobody to speak them. He says, you've done amazingly well so far, but when this momentum kind of slows, or when a misstep happens, as he fully intends to make do in Bossier City, who's going to pick Armis back up? Pablo has the crowd behind him, whereas Armis, by his own design, doesn't have that. We then touch upon how that's pretty much what Armis said to Pablo and about Pablo the last time that they faced off, which was last season in the Collision of the Cruiserweights tournament, where he basically said, it doesn't matter how many flips he does, how many high-flying tricks he pulls off. At the end of the day, El Pablo is just another face in the crowd. A crowd pleaser, sure, but that doesn't win you matches. It doesn't get you to the top. At which point Pablo's like, undisputed champion, baby. And then goes on to say, you've said this about every other high-flying sort of wrestler you've had, that you've got this weird stylistic superiority complex over high-flying wrestlers. And if you bring that attitude to this match, I'm going to slap it out of you, basically. Especially in this kind of match. This is Pablo's wheelhouse. This is not Armis's type of match. Armis is normally very methodical. He probes and looks for weaknesses and opportunities and things like that. And Pablo basically saying, you're not going to get that in this match. Like, I'm going to hit you as hard as I can. I'm going to go whammo super balls to the walls, and I'm going to overwhelm you with speed and agility and energy and all that sort of stuff. And he says, when you are struggling, when that frustration and that feeling that another opportunity is kind of slipping through your fingers, that's when Pablo's going to get the kill shot, and he's going to do what his family have done so many times before, what he's done so many times before. He's going to feed off of that crowd. He's going to rip the American flag down, leave the Mexican flag above, and win the match. And that basically is the story. So Paramount, as I've said before, you only get 1,500 words to tell your story. So we were quite tight in terms of what we could do, and I think I kind of went very much down the, I guess what you would call a traditional shoot promo kind of thing, where it's all stick a microphone in front of El Pablo and let him run with it. Personally, I really enjoyed writing this piece. I think reading back, I just love wordplay and kind of puns and alliteration and all the little kind of literary devices. Is that what they're called? That kind of thing, like the whole bit at the end. You may have survived shark-infested waters against the Gambler and La Pesca a couple of weeks ago, Armis, he whispers, but on July 2nd, we're in my effing pond, and with my own audience with the king now firmly etched in the disco-technicolor dogfighting diary, I'm the one who needs to keep the momentum going. I'm the one who needs to make sure he just keeps swimming. So Armis, as loud as your sea dogs of war might have been barking so far this season, this fight on Wednesday night's going to be one too big for even you to chew. And instead of taking the jaw, you're going to be tasting the effing rainbow. That whole stuff, just kind of taking that one thing of shark-infested waters and kind of adding all these other elements in that, you're in my pond now, sea dogs of war, just keep swimming, all that kind of... I love that stuff. That's what really kind of makes me enjoy the writing process. The scorers did not feel the same. So yeah, this again was another defeat for Pablo, 2 in a row now if you count the Discotechnicos one. And while, I can take absolutely nothing away from Armis, and there's absolutely no shame in losing to certainly one of the most powerful and compelling stories in the company at the minute, I did not anticipate that this would be my lowest scoring chapter of the year so far. But again, as with the last one, we can go through the scorecards together and watch me try not to crash out about it. So, scorecard 1, relevancy feedback. I know it's restricting at 1,500 words, but I would have liked to have seen more character development, argument feedback, no deductions, character feedback, no deductions, flow feedback, no deductions, creativity feedback, no deductions, overall feedback, great promo as per usual, total score 27 out of 28. I think that's fair. I kind of went very much all in on the argument side of things. There wasn't really too much of a focus this time on the overall sort of Pablo Familia Valando sort of story. I mentioned it, a couple of times, but yeah, I can see why maybe it wasn't quite as rounded from that point of view. Scorecard number 2. Relevancy feedback, you hit all the points. Argument feedback, you hit all the points. Character feedback, you didn't have much action or emotion shown, and also not a lot of world building. Flow feedback, hit all the points. Creativity feedback, I got a good laugh and the piece was entertaining through most of it, but you lost me a little towards the end. Also, the location didn't play too much into the actual RP. Total score 24.5 out of 28. All in all, this was a solid piece that fell short on a few technical points. I feel you got a little too caught up in the story and it dragged a little, and that meant you left out a little meat in the other categories like world building and showing your character's mannerisms. Which I don't know if I agree with that. I think the world building part, fine. I didn't really have too much of the wider story in there. I suppose it was very much focused on the opponent and on the match itself, but I don't know, I think I put a fair bit of mannerisms and punctuating the writing with what Pablo was doing at the time and what Stephen was doing at the time, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. If you have a read of it and you think that I was wrong, then let me know in the comments. But equally, it is subjective, and that's the thing that I think as a writer you kind of always have to remember, is that not everyone is going to like everything you do as much as you do, and sometimes people are going to like the things that you do more than you do. It is what it is. It's frustrating when people don't get the same enjoyment from reading something as you did from writing it, but that's how it goes sometimes. And number 3, relevancy feedback, no deductions. Argument feedback: you had a solid top-level argument for winning, but you never touched on why Armis can't counter or beat your strategy. That seemed like a really big hole to leave in the argument. Character feedback: you never furthered anything to do with EP as a person, other than a brief mention of trying to show you belong in the family. There is really nothing here that furthers a personal storyline of El Pablo's. Flow feedback: none, no deductions. Creativity feedback: this promo could have really been held anywhere. The significance of it being at the Wrigley building was never really discussed, so the location fell a bit flat. Total score, 24 out of 28. Overall feedback: this wasn't a bad promo at all, but it felt very high level and lacked the detail needed to take it to the next level. Now, I will say maybe the location side of it is just a result of me being a bit too close to the story, because in my research and having lived this story for as long as I have, I know that Skittles are made by Wrigley and they are based in Chicago at the Wrigley building, or were based at the Wrigley building, and I feel like that was definitely implied in the piece, but maybe the implication was a bit too obscure. It maybe wasn't clear enough. But that whole part with Pablo talking about, meeting Armis with a bit of free market funded muscle, showing that they're in the Wrigley building and talking about the Wrigley company, and then who's been waving the flag of Adam Smith's America more proudly and loudlier than me, and then picking a packet of Skittles off of one of the conveyor belts. In my head, that was a pretty clear nod and a wink to why we were at the Wrigley building. But as I say, I guess maybe a bit too obscure for someone who's not in my brain. Again, slightly frustrating. But again, that's on me as the writer. That's on you as the writer to be able to properly communicate your intent and communicate all those kind of significances and things like that to the reader. So evidently I did not do that here. Likewise with the argument of not showing why Armis can't beat Pablo. I think I just felt like I had implied that with talking about how this match is firmly in Pablo's wheelhouse. It's not Armis's kind of match. His fighting style doesn't match up to that match. So again, I guess in my head just assumed that was implied. And again, with the whole, Pablo's going to have the crowd behind him and all that sort of stuff. But again, I evidently did not make that clear enough, or certainly not for this particular scorer. And there's no hate to any of the scorers for deducting the marks that they have. I have been a scorer and I've been there, and I don't want it to come across as bitter as it sounds. I do appreciate the job that they do, and at the end of the day, as I say, it is very subjective, and not everyone is going to be as close to your characters and your stories as you are. And at the end of the day, I enjoyed writing it. And it's funny because I think losing the match actually plays into the wider Pablo story arc better. I mentioned in the last video how we were basically now in kind of the final act of this particular Pablo and the Valandos arc. And I think if this was a proper novel that we were writing, this would be the point where Pablo is coming to the realization that he's probably not going to get that approval from Viano to be part of the Valando family, but also that doesn't really matter. He's done all of these things and accomplished all of these things. He's become the undisputed champion despite not being part of the family. And just because he's not Pablo Valando, that doesn't diminish his accomplishments and doesn't take away from his own legacy that he will undoubtedly leave once he retires. So yeah, it's that strange thing where, as a storyteller, this struggle and this adversity kind of perfectly feeds that narrative that you're trying to tell. And I think in a perfect world, if you could guarantee that this wouldn't be the only time that I'd ever hold the Undisputed Championship, then you would probably have Pablo lose at the Rumble. His undisputed reign is ultimately a little bit of a damp squib. He then kind of really crashes out, and that's when he comes to the realization and goes, okay, it doesn't matter whether I'm a Volando or not. I am El Pablo. I am good enough. And he then goes on and wins the belt a second time the right way and with the right mentality. But yeah, there is also, unfortunately, the competitive side that really wants to win, and when you don't, there is a little part of you that's like, oh, come on. But again, it is what it is, and I do again just want to say thank you to the scorers for taking the time to read, taking the time to leave their feedback. I will always take what they say on board and try and work with it moving into the next chapter and moving forward. Thank you to everyone watching as well. If you've gone on to read these stories as well, let me know what you think either in the comments below, or you can also leave a comment on the WordPress site, subscribe to there, and subscribe to this channel as well. It all helps the algorithm. But yeah, that is us basically up to date again. Yeah, our next match is not for a couple of weeks now, but boy howdy is it a big one. It is going to be El Pablo defending the Undisputed Championship at the EWC Rumble against arguably the greatest superstar in EWC history, certainly since I've been a part of it, El Pablo's best friend, Ace King. So in the next episode, we will absolutely be right in the thick of trying to figure out how on earth I am going to emerge from this match with Pablo still holding on to that belt. But yeah, I shall leave it there for now. Again, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all the support that you've shown me thus far. It's great to feel like my writing and this character that I've been holding so dear for so many years is finally getting out there and finally kind of being seen by people, and hopefully getting people invested in this kind of thing as well. But yes, thank you for watching. I shall see you next time on Fighting Through Writing.